Hello and welcome again to the second day of our workshop on building the future through community sponsorship of refugees. This hybrid event, which is being jointly sponsored by the Canadian Embassy to the Holy See and ICMC, the International Catholic Migration Commission, in collaboration with the embassies to the Holy See for the US, Britain, Germany, and Italy. A warm welcome to everyone gathered here at the Dicastery, the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and a warm welcome also to our online participants joining us again today. Thank you, those of you who got in touch to say how much you enjoyed yesterday's proceedings. We're glad you can be with us again today. A reminder that interpretation is available in Italian, French, and Spanish. You simply have to click on the globe and choose your preferred language. And a quick reminder also to our panelists gathered here in the room that when you speak, you need to press your microphone on and remember to switch it off again when you finish speaking, because otherwise the microphone doesn't come back to me or whoever the next panelist is. So summarizing from yesterday, we kicked off with a very rich discussion about the benefits and the challenges of community sponsorship of refugees, this program of partnership between governments who facilitate the legal admission for refugees and private or community actors who provide the financial but also the social and often emotional support to the new arrivals so that they feel truly welcomed, supported, and integrated into their new communities. This type of partnership that was pioneered in Canada over 40 years ago is now being implemented, as we heard, in different forms in different countries, I think almost 20 countries on 4 continents. And so we heard about the keys to success for this program, but also some of the real challenges and what those working at the grassroots would really like to see in order to make these programs more successful and more sustainable in the long term. We know the numbers of refugees are continuing to grow, and therefore I think this simply underlines the vital importance of this type of partnership. We heard experiences from those working at the grassroots in different types of community sponsorship in Canada, in the US, in Britain, Germany, and Italy. And so today we welcome back here my panelists at this end of the table. We welcome back Alessandra Santopadre, is Refugee Sponsorship Coordinator for the Catholic Archdiocese of Montreal. Welcome back also Bill Canny, Executive Director of Migration and Refugee Services for the US Catholic Bishops Conference. To Mark Wiggin, Advisor to Caritas in the Diocese of Salford in the north of England. From Italy, we had 3 representatives yesterday. Welcome back again to Cecilia Panni, volunteer with St. Egidio, Fiona Kendall, a European and legal advisor with the Federation of Protestant Churches in Italy. We had yesterday a representative of Caritas, and I think we're expecting Daniele Albanese representing Caritas Italia, the 3rd partner in the Humanitarian Corridors program, which has proved so successful here in Italy. We also heard from former Mayor Andreas Holstein about community sponsorship of refugees in his German town of Altena. He can't be with us, unfortunately, again today, but we remain very mindful of his concluding message on day 1 about how we must remain focused on the faces behind the statistics as we seek to create a culture of welcome in our societies and in our countries, in our local contexts. And so just to try and summarize the main points from that discussion yesterday, I've picked out what I heard as 4 of the keys to success, followed by 4 of the main challenges. And then I'm going to ask our panelists from yesterday if they'd like to add anything or emphasize any of the points that I've made. 4 keys to successes then. What I heard was the vital importance of listening, first of all, to the voices of the refugees themselves. We were privileged yesterday to have with us Anna, a refugee from Ukraine, who fled with her 2 children when the fighting began. She talked to us a little bit about her experience. And in just a moment, we're going to hear today from Mokhtar, who is Mokhtas Anwar Modier from Sudan, who fled to Ethiopia and is now here in Italy as a participant, a beneficiary of Italy's University Corridor Sponsorship Program. So one, listen to the voices of the refugees themselves. Two, it's essential to increase the communication between the community actors and the governments and organizations to streamline the processes and to cut the waiting times for refugees that are waiting to be screened. As one panelist said, there is simply no time to lose when lives are at stake. We've seen that there can be faster responses in the case of the Ukraine crisis, but what about the others who feel that they're somehow second class or not as important in the queue to be processed? Three, it's important to tell the success stories of this community sponsorship program in order to show how that it has benefited both the refugees, but also the communities, the host communities, and to try and combat, to challenge the climate of xenophobia that is growing in so many of our countries, to change the public discourse around migration and refugees. And fourth, as a key to success, it's crucial above all, perhaps, to see refugees not just as a problem to be solved, but really as a resource, as people who bring their experiences and the skills that we need in our countries with their aging populations. And so to really try and change the narrative around who these people are and how they add to really creating and building up our own societies. So those are four keys to success. The four big challenges that I heard coming out of yesterday's discussion. First of all, to make sure that these community sponsorship programs are not seen as an alternative to government responsibilities for refugee settlement. They're not a way of offsetting the numbers, but they must be seen as an addition, a way of supporting the integration and welcome process. Secondly, managing the expectations both of the refugees and of the host communities, who may be very enthusiastic, ready to welcome people, but without perhaps a clear grasp of the longer term issues of these relationships and the challenges that they bring. And so in that context, the third point I think that we underlined yesterday, how to provide professional support when problems do arise, particularly issues of psychological support for refugees, often coming from extremely traumatic situations, but also support for the volunteers and the civil society organizations who may often suffer from burnout given the enormous emotional investment that they put into building these relationships. And fourth, there always has to be a question about money, how to step up funding from both the government and private partnerships involved in this, while at the same time respecting the independence, the experience of the community actors in order to provide for a good division of roles and responsibilities. Four keys to success, four challenges. I'm going to ask our panelists if that kind of reflects what they also took away from yesterday's discussion, or if they would like to add or emphasize anything else. Shall we begin, Bill, if you'd like to add anything from the US experience?
I think that was a very fair representation of yesterday, Philippe. I would just say that as countries, we need to increase resettlement slots dramatically. And we've been exhorted to do that by UNHCR and others. In doing that, we have to look for the balance between sort of pure sponsorship programs where we take our time with intricate community interventions and responsibility and full at some point, perhaps, and faster resettlement programs that take into consideration the fact that people's sort of lives need to be saved, if you will, from their current situation, and perhaps where we use hybrid sort of co-sponsorship with communities, where we, professional organizations, if you will, take a mutual responsibility with community organizations. Thank you.
Thank you for that addition. Mark, from the UK perspective, would you like to add anything to that as well?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree that, those are the key points that came out of yesterday, and good takeaways for us. For me personally, I'd just add a couple of points, and one of them is this diversity of sponsorship as well, and sort of breaking out from the sort of at present, which seems to be faith-based organizations in particular, but trying to broaden out into other forms of civil society. And my thinking behind that is about the actual growth and diversity of lead sponsors, so we can have more of them and therefore grow sponsorship. The second takeaway for me was something that I was reflecting on at the beginning of the meeting yesterday, and that was being amongst friends and being in a sort of safe space, so to speak. And I felt that the whole of yesterday sort of absolutely confirmed and reaffirmed that for me, the commitment and dedication of people in this room towards working alongside the civil society, NGOs and government to see how we can progress this very important pathway for resettlement. So I felt reaffirmed amongst friends and in a very good place. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Let's stay on this side of the room for a moment. Alessandra, from the Canadian perspective.
Oui, bonjour et merci. Aujourd'hui, je parle en français parce que je pense que c'est le bilinguisme canadien et en plus, j'adore le français, alors je m'exprime bien en français aussi. Je voulais souligner, c'est une des choses que tu as dit, les réfugiés comme ressources. Alors, je pense que mon expérience au Canada, il me donne la possibilité de dire, oui, il y a vraiment au Canada, au Québec, quand on parle de multiculturalisme, interculturalisme, une volonté politique d'accueillir les migrants, les réfugiés, avec sa culture, sa langue, et de l'intégrer avec une inclusion participative et responsable dans la société. Et quand on décide d'accueillir, on décide aussi de changer. Et je pense que l'histoire du Canada, il est un exemple concret de ce chemin ensemble, un peu comme le pape a souligné dimanche pour la Journée mondiale du migrant et des réfugiés, marcher ensemble. Et ça, c'est vraiment un chemin qu'on peut voir où le migrant, les réfugiés, les nouveaux arrivants, ces nouveautés qu'il apporte, il est accueilli, il est valorisé et reconnu à manière totale. Alors, je pense que si le programme de parrainage a un succès, est parce qu'il y a cette politique à la base, vraiment d'accueillir la personne comme il est, avec sa culture, sa langue, et de lui donner un espace. Ça, c'est un choix politique qu'il faut faire. Merci.
Alessandra, yes, I think it's fair to say that all of us look to Pope Francis's teaching on this as a key leadership position and something that we're all working towards. From the Italian perspective then, Fiona or Cecilia, would you like to add something about the Humanitarian Corridors program?
Thank you. Just a very short and brief observation. We told yesterday that it was extremely important to monitor the process in every step of the path of integration done by the main sponsors or an umbrella organization in order to manage the possible unexpected changes or events occurring during the period of concern. And this is one of the key of the success, I think.
Thank you and welcome to Daniele Albanese joining us from Caritas Italia today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for being late with traffic in Rome.
I think we all understand that. So, having said at the very beginning, then it's vital to listen to the voices of the refugees themselves. And having summarized, trying to encapsulate the essence of yesterday's conversation, I'm delighted to move on and introduce our first speaker for today. As I mentioned, his name is Mokhtas Anwar Modieh. He's from Sudan. He fled from his country as about 19 years old, in his late teens, fled to Ethiopia. He gained there, while he was there, he gained a bachelor's degree in rural development and agricultural extension. He's now part of the Italian University Corridor Sponsorship Program, and he is working on a master's in law, digital innovation, and sustainability. We're really delighted that you could join us today, Mokhtas, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much. The moderator has introduced I'm Muhatas Anwar Mudir, born in a town in Nuba Mountain States, that is of Sudan. I normally like being motivated to use education as a tool to overcome the obstacles. And before I begin, permit me to express my gratitude on behalf of all refugees to the nations and the hosting communities for accepting to house us as a refugee, followed by UNHCR, donors, and sponsors. I personally want to express my gratitude as well to the Canadian Embassy to Italy for having faith in refugees like me. I am among few who changes every challenges into opportunity. To assure you that I won a number of scholarships that includes DAFE and UNICOR. And this scholarship has been initiated and being funded by individuals, people like you, as we are gathering now. So it is a community who contributed and tried to sponsor and invest on refugees like me. I thank you for that. So in this one, as introduced to me, to you by the moderator, I must specifically choose every field to study just to reflect on the situation that I passed through. I just chose to study rural development and agricultural extensions because of the background of the continent or of the country. So in all means, I can try to contribute in other way around through rural development or through agricultural activities, of which food is the main issue, not to refugees alone, but to everyone globally. I now have the opportunity through these scholarships to look forward to a fresh, promising, and untried chapter in my life. And I urge you as a community, as good wishes, to try to give more opportunity to refugees to have this hope and promising future for their career or for their life. General advice to donors, I surely assure you that refugees have skills, morals, and strength that can be developed for their own benefit and for the benefit of the community that surrounds them. Not to their country alone, but the country that hosts them, they have a positive impact that can surely help in that case. And I can testify to you that as being a refugee in Ethiopia for all this long time, I did all my best to try to be a motivated individual and try to be a model to most of the refugee students or all refugees who are striving, who are hunger for like education and other basic needs. So in that case, my coming to Italy is a surprise, as well as a motivation that every refugee would like to take these steps to follow education, though they face a lot of challenges. Another thing is investing in refugees by giving them access to education, health care, and other necessities. You are contributing for healing them just emotionally, physically, and economically. At least it is a belief that education can heal the broken heart of every individual. The challenges that mostly refugees faces are, I can start with my personal experience, and all other refugees faces the same issue or the same scenarios. Refugees can face different aspects in life. Most refugees, like for females, they can face rape issues, which is one of the psychological issues to females. Refugees as well, they face a lot of challenges in which they are persecuted or executed through the government or other political individuals within their country. They are facing challenges based on their beliefs, but all those ones can never try to take away the future of refugees like me. As I'm standing with you now, all I face it, but now I am gaining and I am very happy to be among you and try to express my view. It's now really my pleasure, and I believe that every refugee can have a life and can have a future wherever he or she is alive and he or she is hosted within any country where he or she resides. Above all those, it's one of the problems of which some refugees spend 10, 15, 20 years without hearing from their parents or without hearing from their families, but they still have hope that one day, one time, they will meet with their families and try to have a better and a communication like previous. And to testify and end here is, for example, refugee like me, I have 15 years, not 15 years, sorry, almost 12 years without hearing from my parents. But that never stopped me from pursuing education or getting your help, your assistance. I never try to give up, but I have to be a motivation and one of the strongest refugees to have to prove to communities, to donors like you, that refugees can do whatever it takes and they have strength. They are one of the vulnerable individuals, but they have the strongest ability and efforts to overcome the challenges, trauma, being social problems, being political or whatever. They can have hope and ability to strive for the better of themselves, the family, the country, and everyone who surrounds them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Moktes. I think it's humbling and inspiring for all of us to hear about your ability to be able to turn challenges into opportunities, and particularly by your desire to use your own very difficult experiences to support others and to enable them to benefit from similar educational opportunities that you have been able to enjoy. And I think this message of never giving up hope, to be able to continue to persevere, determined to make the best of your situation, is really something that inspires all of us engaged in this kind of work. So thank you very much. And we would hope that if you want to take part in the conversation as we go through the rest of today's program, you'll feel able to do that as well. So from hearing from the refugee perspective, we're now going to hear from the perspective of the national governments. And we're very privileged today to have representatives with us from the 5 countries involved. And we're going to begin with our keynote address from Julieta Valls-Noyes. She is the Assistant Secretary at the US State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, a position she took up earlier this year in March of this year. Before that, she also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs, where she managed relations with 12 Western European countries and the European Union. Ambassador Noyes is a first-generation American whose own parents entered the United States from Cuba as refugees, and therefore she brings a personal perspective as well as her extensive professional experience. Thank you very much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippa, for that kind introduction. And Motas, thank you for your inspirational words. And thank you to the International Catholic Migration Commission and the Government of Canada for organizing these 2 days of discussion and learning. It is great to see so many friends in this room. As some of you may know, I spent 3 very happy years here in Rome while I was the Deputy Chief of Mission at the US Embassy to the Holy See. And being here today feels like coming home. So I also want to thank our current ambassador to the Holy See, Joseph Donnelly, Deputy Chief of Mission Patrick Cannell, and their team, and especially Sarah Tatum, for proposing and supporting my return home to discuss an issue that's very close to my heart. I'm honored by this invitation, and I'd like to share some reflections on how the US government is seeking to enhance and expand refugee resettlement through community sponsorship. And it's fitting that we gather here today at ICMC's invitation for these conversations. For decades before United Nations member states adopted the Refugee Convention in 1951, it was small groups of citizens all over the world, often organized and supported by religious organizations and communities, that formed the heart of refugee resettlement efforts. Long before we had a refugee convention, we had churches and synagogues and mosques and meetings where congregants who live out their faith by opening their arms and their hearts to the vulnerable. And it is also personal for me. As Philippa mentioned, and as I said at my confirmation hearing, almost exactly 1 year ago, the opportunity to lead the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration is the greatest honor of my professional life. And that's because without the work of that bureau, my life would not have been possible. My own parents did arrive in the United States as refugees from Cuba, forced to flee the Castro regime. They arrived decades before the United States formally established the US Refugee Admissions Program, so they relied on their neighbors and community institutions to help them build new lives in the United States. And throughout my life, I have heard their stories about the people who helped them. And so my work in PRM now is an opportunity to repay that debt of gratitude. In my first 6 months on the job, I have seen and heard repeatedly how eager Americans from seemingly every part of our society are to welcome Afghans and Ukrainians to their communities, just as previous generations did for my parents and so many others like them. So now, as we work to meet President Biden's very ambitious refugee resettlement goals, we will rely on average citizens' generosity and compassion more than ever. Soon after taking office in January 2021, the president issued an executive order instructing the State Department to design a community-led private sponsorship pilot program as a complement to the government-led US Refugee Admissions Program, or as we call it, USRAP, because we love acronyms in the United States. We got to work right away, and we were planning an early 2022 launch when Kabul fell on August 15th. So we immediately redirected all of our resources to mount the largest resettlement effort in modern US history. And we did it with an overstretched staff and a domestic resettlement infrastructure that was weakened by years of underfunding and neglect and COVID. But with the help of a large coalition of partner organizations, we overcame those daunting obstacles. In just 6 months, the PRM team resettled over 82,000 Afghans in the United States. And while we hated to pause our broader work on the private sponsorship pilot program, we were able to use the progress that we had made to find innovative solutions for relocated Afghans. In October of 2021, we launched the Sponsor Circle program, a testament to our critical work with new partners. The program is a community-led policy innovation that unlocks critical resettlement capacity for Afghans. By enabling everyday Americans to take the lead in welcoming Afghan newcomers, the Sponsor Circle program allowed us to tap into the energy and enthusiasm of ordinary Americans to quickly expand our domestic resettlement capacity. And since we launched that Sponsor Circle program nearly a year ago, more than 140 sponsor circles have welcomed hundreds of Afghan newcomers across 33 of our 50 American states. These circles represent pockets of new capacity around the country and remarkable acts of engagement by everyday Americans from all walks of life, including a Vietnamese American coalition in Seattle. And I love this story because they came as refugees decades ago, and now they're paying it forward by helping the new generation I am certain that the Afghans will be helping some future generation of refugees as well. But other sponsor circles consisted of military veterans in Wickford, Rhode Island, and Farmington, New Mexico. We had faculty and staff at institutions of higher learning in Montclair, New Jersey, and Williamsburg, Virginia. Faith congregations in Denver, Colorado, and Huntsville, Alabama. And there were even groups of US State Department employees who signed up in their personal capacity to welcome the Afghans. And then, of course, in early 2022, while we were hard at work on the sponsor circles, we collectively pivoted once again. This time to respond to the call to find solutions for those fleeing further Russian aggression against Ukraine. We drew on our shared insights and experiences that we had gleaned in the Sponsor Circle program with colleagues from the Department of Homeland Security, and we helped inform their thinking on creating and linking sponsorship to non-resettlement pathways. The result of that effort was called Uniting for Ukraine, or again, U4U, because why Americans love acronyms. So U4U was a new initiative that enables Ukrainians to access a streamlined humanitarian parole pathway initiated by private sponsors, who in turn commit to providing support for Ukrainians while they're in the United States. U4U represents another US government effort to adapt a private sponsorship model and harness the widespread outpouring of interest from the American public in supporting Ukrainians who wish to come to the United States. In the months since we launched U4U, it has received tens of thousands of applications from sponsors, further demonstrating the enormous potential of private sponsorship as a policy innovation that can effectively leverage the capacity of motivated community actors to welcome newcomers. I can't believe I got through that sentence in one breath. Okay, our work on broad-based community sponsorship pilot program continues, and gatherings like this one today are timely for a very sad reason. And that is that we're facing an unprecedented displacement crisis, one that will require all of our creativity and innovations to address. I have been so inspired by the countless examples of extraordinary generosity that I have seen in the United States. But that generosity is not a uniquely American instinct. In just my second week in this job, I traveled to Poland and Moldova, where I saw average citizens and small businesses opening their arms and their hearts to displaced Ukrainians, offering food, shelter, employment, education, and friendship. The very next week, I visited Mexico, where local religious communities and businesses are supporting migrants fleeing violence and extreme poverty in Venezuela, Cuba, and elsewhere in the region. In July, I visited Uganda, where refugees from Sudan, Congo, Burundi, South Sudan, and other neighboring countries live side by side with their Ugandan neighbors and have done so for decades, continuing a deeply moving Ugandan tradition of welcoming refugees as brothers and sisters. So as we look to the future of refugee resettlement, I am more and more convinced that it is our own citizens who will be our most important resource. So let me end by once again thanking ICMC and my Canadian colleagues for organizing this event and for inviting me to participate. I'm excited to be back in Rome. I'm excited to hear this afternoon's discussions, and thank you again.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Noyes, for your personal perspective on this, but also reminding us of the impressive US track record in recent years in resettling those coming in from Afghanistan, particularly, and Ukraine. We move on now to Italy, our host country, and we're going to hear next from Francesca Ferrandino, who is the head of the Department for Civil Liberties and Immigration at Italy's Interior Ministry. She trained as a lawyer before she began her career in Italy's prefecture system, and she has served as prefect to the cities of Agrigento, Bergamo, Messina, Catanzaro and Bologna before being appointed last year as the head of the Department for Civil Liberties and Immigration. Welcome, Prefetto Francesca Ferrandino. The floor is yours.
Grazie, buonasera a tutti e grazie davvero per l'invito. È un onore e un'emozione partecipare per la prima volta come capo dipartimento per le libertà civili e l'immigrazione a questo interessante workshop, perché è convincimento, credo, di tutti, di tutto il tavolo, che il confronto di esperienze di questo genere, soprattutto l'aver ascoltato le riflessioni di questo studente sudanese, al quale do veramente tutto quanto il mio benvenuto e la simpatia di tutto il Dipartimento, è senza ombra di dubbio un motivo di arricchimento. L'Italia è un paese giovane sotto questo profilo e quindi ha bisogno di ascoltare assolutamente anche le esperienze di altri paesi, quali il Canada, gli Stati Uniti, paesi che si sono misurati col tema dell'immigrazione prima ancora di noi. Che cosa si rileva in Italia e perché è interessante partecipare oggi a questo workshop? Intanto l'ineludibile necessità di costruire reti che travalichino le competenze, anzi scusate, che affianchino le competenze dello Stato per costruire relazioni orizzontali inclusive, che sono quelle di cui parlava lo studente sudanese e quello di cui ci avete parlato prima facendo la somma degli esiti delle riflessioni che sono state svolte ieri. Questo perché? Perché l'arrivo e la permanenza dei rifugiati, non lo devo dire io, costituiscono un impegno lavorativo. Io direi non tanto una sfida, scusatemi, ma un impegno lavorativo rigoroso e determinante che si poggia su una serie di pilastri. Come lavora l'Italia dal 2015 a questa parte? È un paese giovane sotto questo profilo, l'ho detto prima e ci tengo a ribadirlo. Nel 2015 si è concentrata moltissimo sul programma nazionale di reinsediamento, sulla base ovviamente delle raccomandazioni della Commissione europea e del giugno del 2015 e a seguito delle conclusioni del Consiglio GAI del 20 luglio. E attraverso il programma nazionale di reinsediamento e attraverso ovviamente l'aiuto e la segnalazione dell'ACNUR, questo programma ha consentito l'arrivo ad oggi in Italia di 2.514 rifugiati provenienti da Giordania, Libano, Libia, Siria, Sudan e Turchia. Ora, nel nostro programma di reinsediamento, ovviamente, noi abbiamo in Italia una modalità di accoglienza, almeno secondo questo canale, basato sull'intervento dello Stato, ma Stato inteso non come Stato centrale, ma come Stato delle autonomie locali. Tant'è vero che i rifugiati che abbiamo accolto nel nostro paese attraverso il programma nazionale di reinsediamento sono stati poi collocati nel sistema SAI, che è il sistema di accoglienza e di integrazione, che cosa prevede? Prevede attività di formazione, attività di orientamento lavorativo e qualificazione professionale, ma prevede anche ciò che è stato, credo, evidenziato in maniera abbastanza forte sia quest'oggi e presumo ieri, la necessità di un colloquio diretto con le persone che vivono sul territorio. Attraverso gli enti locali questa cosa viene continuamente coltivata. Non possiamo dire di averlo raggiunto al 100%, però possiamo dire che attraverso il sistema della rete SAI si cerca di coltivare anche il colloquio e l'incontro tra culture e tradizioni, religioni che devono trovare assolutamente in un ponte il loro equilibrio di vita in un mondo che è sicuramente già multiculturale, prima ancora che lo vogliamo a prescindere dagli orientamenti di ciascuno di noi. Che cosa fa l'Italia dal 2016 in poi? Accoglie con grandissimo favore le proposte fatte e presentate con una certa forza anche dal terzo settore, perché si affianchi il programma di reinsediamento, quindi non perché sostituisca, ma perché venga affiancato il programma di reinsediamento con una nuova progettualità, una progettualità privata e complementare che garantisca che cosa? Attraverso forme concrete. Ecco, ha reso con i corridoi umanitari concreta quella relazione orizzontale cui ho fatto cenno prima, e cioè grazie ai corridoi umanitari, non tantissimi per il momento da noi, ma sono stati attuati modelli di arrivo prima di tutto in sicurezza. È un esempio di questa arrivo in sicurezza, ce lo può dare senza ombra di dubbio il protocollo dalla Libia, che è stato sottoscritto nel 2021 e che mira a ridurre proprio il rischio di morti in mare, di cui siamo assolutamente testimoni, essendo una nazione che si affaccia sul Mediterraneo. Quindi arrivi in sicurezza, ma non solo arrivi in sicurezza. Necessità e concretezza in campo nell'ambito dello sviluppo di una pluralità, ecco, sviluppo di una pluralità di forme di accoglienza, non gestite esclusivamente da enti pubblici, ma che si avvalgono del preziosissimo apporto degli enti privati e del terzo settore. Per noi è stato un po', come dire, un modo nuovo di lavorare sul tema dell'accoglienza e dell'integrazione dei cittadini stranieri che arrivano sul nostro territorio e che chiedono asilo. E ci siamo avvalsi sotto questo settore e abbiamo accolto con molto favore l'aiuto e abbiamo sottoscritto dei patti con comunità importanti, quali sapete la comunità di Sant'Egidio, la Federazione delle Chiese Evangeliche in Italia, la Tavola Valdese, la CEI, la Confederazione Episcopale Italiana. E nel corso di poco più di 6 anni, dal 2016 ad oggi, siamo riusciti a far entrare in maniera legale, sicura e ad avviare ad un orientamento di formazione grazie al terzo settore, grazie a questa nuova forma e a nuova modalità di accoglienza e integrazione, oltre 4.000 rifugiati. I protocolli cui facciamo leva sono il protocollo dal Libano, che è stato un po' l'antesignano nel nostro mondo dei corridoi umanitari, che ha consentito l'arrivo di 2.336 persone dal 2015 in poi, più volte rinnovato, persone che provenivano dalla Siria. Poi ci siamo, come dire, abbiamo esteso la nostra collaborazione con le comunità di cui abbiamo parlato prima per l'Etiopia. 12 gennaio 2017 allargato recentemente e in fase di conclusione, che ha consentito l'arrivo di 1.114 rifugiati, ma non è solo l'arrivo, ripeto, ma anche modalità e modelli di sviluppo e di integrazione che si avvalgono dell'ausilio della società civile, che costituisce un attore indispensabile nella vita di tutti i giorni ed è sicuramente quell'unione ci consente di coniugare in questa maniera le ineludibili compiti e funzioni che uno Stato deve svolgere con le attività diciamo di politiche sociali per le quali sono necessarie anche le partecipazioni dei cittadini e degli attori istituzionali non del terzo settore che sono presenti sul territorio. Poi abbiamo detto il protocollo sulla Libia, che fino adesso ha consentito l'arrivo di 373 persone, ma che ha un elemento di novità in più. Con il protocollo dalla Libia abbiamo cercato di trovare una forma intermedia di collaborazione anche a livello finanziario, perché un quorum di persone che sono venute dalla Libia sono state gestite anche dal punto di vista finanziario dalla realtà del terzo settore. Le rimanenti, 180 circa, vengono ovviamente accolte a carico dello Stato. In ultimo, il protocollo per l'Afghanistan. Si è parlato prima delle questioni legate alle crisi dell'Afghanistan. L'Italia ha cercato sempre d'intesa con gli attori del terzo settore che hanno grande esperienza in questo tema di aggiungere quel quid in più necessario, ritenuto necessario per far fronte a una crisi senza precedenti, attraverso ovviamente l'istituto dei corridoi umanitari. E difatti sono state trovate, abbiamo cercato di trovare rapide forme di ingresso legale e allargando anche l'ingresso legale da paesi che non erano soltanto l'Iran e il Pakistan, ma recentemente su richiesta proprio della Caritas e su richiesta anche della comunità di Sant'Egidio, il corridoio è stato allargato anche a paesi dalla Giordania e dalla Bosnia. Questo progetto consentirà l'arrivo di 400 afghani. Ovviamente lo consideriamo questo nuovo modo lavorativo che si ispira moltissimo anche alle esperienze fatte da altri paesi più avanzati di noi su questo settore. Lo consideriamo un punto di partenza, ne abbiamo bisogno. C'è bisogno di ingressi legali in Italia, non c'è bisogno di morti in mare, non c'è bisogno di morti sulla terra o di respingimenti. Abbiamo però bisogno di dare una regola, abbiamo la necessità di accogliere nel nostro paese persone alle quali dobbiamo sicuramente, nei confronti dei quali abbiamo dei doveri, ma che hanno ovviamente anche dei doveri nei confronti della popolazione italiana. E qui rimane fermo ciò che è stato detto prima, l'ineludibile necessità di un colloquio. Io vi ringrazio, questa è l'esperienza italiana per il momento. Grazie di tutto.
Grazie mille, prefetto Ferrandino, per aver condiviso con noi qualcosa dell'esperienza italiana e anche per aver sottolineato l'utilità di questo nostro esperienza, il nostro incontro per condividere le esperienze di diversi paesi. From Italy, then, we're going to move across to the UK, and we're going to hear next from Joanna Penrose Buckley. She is the Deputy Director of Refugee Resettlement and Integration at the UK Home Office, a position she has held since last year. And as such, she is the co-leader of the policy team responsible for refugee resettlement, community sponsorship, and integration. Joanna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. So I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to Mohta. I know others have already thanked you, but your story is like truly inspirational, and you're such a credit to your family, your parents, and whether you have been in contact or not, you really are a great example, not just to other refugees, but to everybody that meets you. So thank you for sharing your story so generously. It's been very interesting hearing other government representatives speak, because so many of the topics they touch on are common to all of us, wherever we are. It's a reminder of how interconnected we are and how the community that we coexist within actually is touched by the same events, even if we're physically located in different places. So I've been asked to share some thoughts on the role of national government in enabling community sponsorship. So there are a number of people in the room that already know about the origins of community sponsorship in the UK and have been heavily involved since the beginning. But for those who are not familiar, the scheme was born out of a desire to harness public and community support for refugees amidst the crisis in Syria in 2015. We didn't call it that at the time, but it really was kind of a cross-sector partnership, co-creation, co-design to bring about a really positive impact for refugees who have been impacted by the conflict in Syria. In the UK, community groups are asked to raise money and to provide integration support for a year, and to identify suitable housing that will be available for at least 2 years after the refugees arrive. In reality, as I know Mark from Caritas in the UK will confirm, groups often do far, far more than that. So these are sort of the minimum requirements, but once relationships are formed, networks are in place, they're often relationships for life rather than the set period that you've been asked to provide support for. So from informal language exchange to facilitating relationships within new communities, helping arrivals move into work, and even showing families where to buy groceries or to buy the best ingredients in the town. That's what communities get involved with. The UK government believes that this is the power of sponsorship because it builds on the skills, the desire, and the existing capacity within local communities. So this is the first role of government, making the most of the skills that are already present within civil society. The UK government has been proud to have worked with these communities, as I mentioned before, in co-design from the very beginning, working with communities, civil society, including Caritas, including other organisations who are dialed in and listening to deliver this unique form of resettlement. So community sponsorship in the UK has now become an excellent example of community welcome and a strong demonstration of the impact that we can have when communities play a direct role in welcoming refugees. The credibility that community sponsorship has brought is a key factor in the UK government building a scheme that has the principles of sponsorship at its heart as our key humanitarian route for those fleeing Ukraine, which is our Homes for Ukraine scheme that we touched on yesterday. So the second role of government is obviously to provide an enabling environment that empowers communities to take increasing ownership of the scheme. This means creating the structures and processes that ensure we can set the scheme up for long-term success. So often, as any new policy or program beds in, it becomes clear where improvements can be made. When the scheme launched, there were understandably a number of what Mark referred to yesterday as bureaucratic processes that were put in place as we trialed the program to see how it would work. Of course, we needed to protect and safeguard refugees whilst we tested the model and grew to understand its success more fully. But we are certainly in listening mode now as we consider the future of the scheme and we listen to stakeholders to see what could be adapted and what needs to change to ensure that we can really allow the scheme to grow and make the most of it for supporting refugees. So government's role in listening to those with expertise on the ground is crucial. Given our experience in the UK and the success of the community sponsorship scheme, we're more mindful of the need to ensure continual review of the way that the scheme is working and to ensure that our policies don't create unnecessary burdens to groups that participate. My speaking notes, Mark, say, I'm sure Mark will have views, but I think we have already exchanged our views. But effectively, there are certainly processes we should streamline. And we recognise that there's a balance to be struck between ensuring we have appropriate safeguards in place and streamlining the approach for communities that want to support refugees. But we remain and will always remain open to listening to and will continue to listen to the views of civil society because we really want this to work and we want it to work safely and effectively, but not in such a way that for civil society it's too onerous to take part because that defeats the purpose of the scheme. So thirdly, there's an important role for government in promoting growth, including using the government platform to showcase stories of success, of which of course there are many. So the UK has a wonderful story to tell, both from Homes for Ukraine and community sponsorship. And there's no shortage of examples of the British public dedicating themselves to supporting refugees and giving them the best possible start to their new life in the UK. And of course, as we mentioned yesterday, the success goes both ways, with many communities benefiting immensely from the experience themselves. There are countless amazing stories of welcoming communities who found common ground with those they welcomed. And we know that the integration outcomes for refugees who've come to the UK under community sponsorship are often incredibly strong and stronger than through other forms of resettlement based on our data. So of course, that is something that we are very interested in. So through our plans for growth, which UK ministers have committed to through the UK's new plan for immigration, our ambition for community sponsorship is that it continues to bring benefits to both refugees and UK communities, but on a larger scale and therefore with a bigger impact. Demonstrating the benefits of community sponsorship, both for refugees and the communities that welcome them, will remain an important tenet of this growth. So thank you all for your time. Really appreciate being able to be here, and thank you to ICMC and to the Canadian government because we think this is a fantastic event.
Thank you very much to Joanna Penrose Buckley there for highlighting the UK government's commitment to this work and to their understanding of the need to streamline and improve the partnership to make the system work even better and to become more sustainable in the future. I'd like to introduce now the first of two of our virtual panelists, virtual participants. First of all, we're going to go over to Dr. Janine Romero Valenzuela. who is the Policy Officer for Resettlement and Community Sponsorship at the German Federal Ministry of the Interior and Community. She, before her current posting, was a policy officer at the divisions for integration and for geoinformation. She's also worked as head of the office for the vice president of the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees. And we're very pleased to welcome her to the event this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, Philippa. Thank you very much. And I would like to share some thoughts on the German community sponsorship scheme, which is called NEST, New Start as a Team. Germany has been active in community sponsorship since 2019, where we started this NEST program as a piloting program. We've actually just recently decided that we are going to make it a regular program with 200 admission slots per year in 2023, and the admission slots will then rise in the following years. And NEST has been a program that has been closely developed, or developed in close cooperation between government actors and the civil society. On the public side, it's managed by the ministry I work for, so the Ministry of Interior, but also the Federal Commissioner for Migration, Refugees and Integration and the Federal Office of Migration and Refugees. And it is supported by a civil society contact point, supported by Caritas Germany, the German Red Cross and the Evangelic Church of Westphalia, with whom we also going to continue working in the next 3 years at least. As in most of the programs, the refugees are supported financially and, of course, through integration support by mentors in Germany. And we have actually reduced the participation requirements starting in July. So it used to be 2 years that mentors had to finance rent or find housing, but now it's 1 year, as well as 1 year of mentoring and integration support. So just like the UK example we just heard, and we also see in Germany that most groups continue working with the refugees way after the time they have agreed upon, also longer than the 2 years that have been previously agreed. But we thought that we would like to lower the barrier so that more people can become involved in the program, and also that we can maybe make it attractive for new groups. Also, for example, outside of, we also have a lot of church-based support, which is great. We also would like to carry the program into other spheres of society, find, for example, students also to engage in the program. And that's why we thought that it's important to make lower barriers for engagement. Our NEST refugees actually are accepted through the same resettlement program that we organize in the division I work for. And they are asked in the person of resettlement whether they want to participate in community sponsorship or whether they want to be resettled through our government-funded resettlement program, which is in Germany still the major resettlement option. So in the German case, I would say, coming back to the topic of the workshop, the role of the government in community sponsorship is to manage the regular resettlement as a basis for community sponsorship and to provide enabling conditions for the civil society to engage in community sponsorship. And currently we are offering 6,000 slots for resettlement and humanitarian admission, which is a slight increase from last year. And there will probably also be a slight increase next year, or we're still discussing it in the government, although the coalition agreement also foresees to strengthen resettlement in general. And resettlement refugees in Germany are treated approximately to refugees under the Geneva Convention. They receive a 3-year resident permit, which can be extended. They get social aid and they can work. And this is also true for the refugees that come through our community sponsorship because the conditions are the same. And the government role also, well, is of course on the side of organizing travel to Germany, selection, mission, security vetting, but also it is responsible, in this case, the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, to match the refugees with the mentors, specifically based on housing capacities. We see that community sponsorship is a valuable addition to our humanitarian mission programs and a possibility for civil society to get directly involved and also to shape the programs. As I said, I believe that the role of government lies in providing the enabling conditions for refugees to be admitted to a third country, and for civil society to get involved and support these refugees here in Germany. So the government needs to guarantee the program organization, visa proceedings, security checks, initial support, and also living support. But when the refugees arrive in the host society, there are many possibilities and also many necessities that we see for civil society to get involved and to support reception and integration. And specifically in the current situation with a lot of refugees arriving also from Ukraine and asylum numbers rising in general, it shows us that the role of civil society is paramount and it's also destined to grow. Because also, as in the German case, we have a government now that's very willing to strengthen humanitarian mission, but other necessities, for example, the Ukraine crisis that we didn't expect, well, this also signifies that the initial goals might not always be reachable for us in the increase of humanitarian mission programs, at least not without the involvement, and that's practical involvement and financial involvement of the civil society. And a key factor that we see, well, have been seen for the last years, but currently is becoming dramatic, is the factor of housing. I know that there's other countries in the EU which have stopped humanitarian missions altogether because housing capacities are not available. Although such dramatic measures are not discussed in Germany, we also see that housing becomes extremely scarce and that different programs compete over the scarce housing for the refugees that are admitted. I know that civil society cannot solve the housing problem, that civil society in community sponsorship is also confronted by the same housing problems, but what we see in our community sponsorship program is that sponsors are often more flexible and able to secure housing even under difficult circumstances, as they can rely on a network of private contacts and, well, are just more creative maybe than the government. And also, housing refugees as early as possible in private accommodation is paramount for the integration. In general, the one-on-one support that our NEST program or other community sponsorship programs provide for the refugees helps their integrations greatly, and is another central argument why this program should be continued and extended. The government role is to better enable this program and reduce barriers for participation, as we have done in Germany recently in our NEST program. They are, as you have mentioned in the beginning of today's session, the role of the government cannot be finding alternatives through community sponsorship, but that they are always in addition to a government-provided basis and a government-provided program organization. Which I understood is also the essence of your discussion yesterday. And with this, I would like to close, and I'm very happy to also discuss these points further on with all of you.
Thank you very much indeed for sharing with us something of the German experience there and highlighting the enabling role that governments must play in supporting the civil society organizations. We're going to move on now and hear from our final government participants. We're going to hear from Canada. Again, online we have with us Michelle Maskell. She is the Director General of the Resettlement and Policy Branch of the Canadian Ministry of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. She's also held executive positions with wide-ranging responsibilities in the Canadian government, from the development of people management initiatives and strategies to key procurements to support the COVID-19 response efforts. So we're delighted that you can join us today. Michelle, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I wanted to first thank ICMC for the invite as well as the Embassy of Canada to the Holy See for coordinating and organizing this event. I also wanted to, acknowledge Mota's comments and for sharing his story. I think it's really important to always remember to sort of center the voices of those with lived experiences so that we never forget the reason why we are doing what we're doing. It can get lost at times. I've recently taken on the role of leading a new branch within Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. And the branch is dedicated to resettlement policy. And part of my branch's mandate includes continuing to refine our longstanding approach to private and community sponsorship, as well as promoting it around the world. I understand yesterday you had a fruitful discussion exchanging civil society experiences in sponsorship, and my officials have shared some of the key insights with me as we look to learn from you as Canada continues this important work. And the discussion underlined the importance of grassroots organizations spearheading community sponsorship and the need to support and sustain these organizations. It also brought forward that we're all at different stages in implementing community sponsorship programs and have a lot to learn from one another. So to provide you with some context about Canada's approach, one of the most inspiring chapters in Canada's immigration story is that of refugee sponsorship. Since 1979, Canada has resettled over 300,000 refugees through our private sponsorship of refugees program. Our programs have evolved over time, but what has remained at their core is engaging sponsors, including established organizations that are often faith-based, ethnic, or humanitarian, to come together to welcome and integrate refugees and communities across our country. In fact, working in partnerships with individual citizens and community sponsorship groups has become part of the fabric of Canada's resettlement policy and programming. The benefits are widespread. Our sponsorship programs have allowed us to help more refugees than we could through independent government initiatives alone. They've allowed us to facilitate Canadians' ability to directly respond to global refugee crises. Our programs have also enabled us to meaningfully engage with communities, including about the social, cultural, and economic contributions refugees bring to Canada. And finally, they foster better outcomes and community ties for refugees. Canada has set out important foundations for community sponsorship approaches. For example, we know they work best when they're tailored to meet the needs and context of local communities, when the sponsor group is deeply responsible and deeply empowered as part of the process, when government and community groups work hand in hand, and when those with lived experiences are engaged and involved at all stages of the process. Building on this experience, we have taken on a role as a global leader through the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative to share Canada's history and experience, and to support countries in designing new programs that meet their unique needs. This important initiative has opened up thousands of additional protection spaces for refugees around the world. Moving forward, we see opportunities to pause and reflect on our work and to learn from our state and civil society partners. This is a time of enormous change, with the global pandemic having had a significant impact on our resettlement efforts around the world, and with new and emerging global crises creating an overwhelming global need for protection. In this context, Canada has responded and adapted our responses as required, but we recognize the need to further reflect. This includes thinking through how to ensure programs are able to rise to the challenges ahead, to harness the groundswell of support we've seen from private citizens and communities to welcome and support individuals from Afghanistan and Ukraine to come to Canada, and to ensure the voices of refugees are reflected in all of our efforts. We continue to see an outpouring of goodwill by Canadians from across the country donating, volunteering, and supporting those affected by the crises in Afghanistan and Ukraine. The Government of Canada is supporting this goodwill by directing citizens to organizations in need and providing resources in their communities, as well as engaging businesses to support newcomers. As we rely on sponsors to enable community sponsorship to flourish, training and support for sponsors is paramount to equip sponsorship groups and communities with expertise and skills to support resettled refugees. We're also keen to continue to promote and learn from responses from other countries. It is our privilege to take part in this important session on how we can work together to build the future of community sponsorship, including through new and innovative connections to labor and education pathways. Community sponsorship remains a key lever for all of us to build global momentum and to increase the availability of protection spaces and options for more refugees around the world. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the discussion during the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you once again to all the representatives of the governments who have been sharing perspectives and commenting on the ways they're trying to support the civil society organizations engaged in this work. I would remind you that we will have a coffee break at the end of the next section, but I'm going to push straight on now and introduce the speakers from our different international organizations and NGOs who are at the very heart of this work. We're going to start off by hearing from Hannah Gregory, who is the Global Director of Pathway Development at the University of Ottawa's Refugee Hub, of which the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative is a vital part. Prior to joining the Refugee Hub, Hannah, in fact, was a senior civil servant at the UK Home Office, but as the head of the Refugee Resettlement and Integration Unit, she had responsibility for resettlement policy, integration, and leading the development of the UK Community Sponsorship Scheme. But today she's going to talk to us about the work of the Refugee Hub at the University of Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa, and it's wonderful to be here with my previous colleagues from the UK Home Office and with this fantastic kind of cast selection of people both here in the room but also online. So I would like to echo others' thanks both to the organisers, ICMC and the Government of Canada, today's event, and to Motas and to Anna for sharing those inspiring stories which we can root all of our discussion in. One of the golden threads, I think, that we've seen coming through those discussions yesterday and today has been the importance of partnership in supporting the growth of community sponsorship. And the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, we can have a discussion about acronyms because that's known as GRSI, Jersey, and the controversial one, Greasy. I call it GRSI, is a true and I think pretty unique partnership between the Government of Canada, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, private sector foundations, and the University of Ottawa Refugee Hub. It was launched in December 2016 with the purpose of working with countries around the world to assist in the creation and development of new community sponsorship programs through, as Michelle has just shared, sharing Canada's deep, long-standing, very inspiring history and experience of private sponsorship. The GRSI has three main aims. Firstly, to increase the capacity for countries to welcome refugees and improve refugee integration outcomes through a whole of society approach. So really that partnership approach, which is at the core of our discussions over these 2 days. To strengthen local host communities that come together to welcome newcomers, and to promote welcoming and inclusive societies and improve that narrative around refugees and other newcomers, which is so vital to all of our work. So we are actually in our 5th anniversary year, and wow, the sponsorship ecosystem has just evolved so dramatically during that time. I've got a slide that I use sometimes, which does the comparison between sort of back in 2016 and now, and it's phenomenal, that explosion. You know, there were 3 countries with community sponsorship schemes back in 2016, and there are now community sponsorship programs either in development, being piloted in almost 20 countries around the world. And part of our role at the GRSI has been both in supporting the development of those programs, but also, as Michelle was saying, learning from them to inform new program design and program adaptation as the context changes within which we work. So what has the GRSI's role been in this? I'm going to pull out 3 main elements to that role. The first is quite specific country work, working alongside governments, civil society organizations, and other partners to design and develop policy frameworks and support the development of civil society infrastructure to pilot and then develop community sponsorship programs. That can include partnering local actors with experienced advisors from other countries who can help them with the specifics of their programs. That could be policy writing, it can be community mobilization, it can be every detail in between. And I think as we're demonstrating here, creating that sort of shared community for exchange is such a powerful way of building on the resilience and the scale of these programs. And I have to say, what a joy it is to be able to do this in person again. It just makes such a difference to be able to exchange it, with apologies to colleagues who are joining us virtually. We also act as a convener, creating, as I've just said, this space for shared exchange and connection at many different levels. So we have a formal states network, which is co-chaired by the UK Home Office and the Government of Canada. We also have a civil society organization, Champions Network. So we have these formal networks, but also just those more informal opportunities to meet and exchange. We also produce resources and tools that are openly accessible. And that ranges from a training package that local organizers can use to train new community sponsorship groups to a very detailed policy design workbook. And it's very always satisfying, I think, when we see people kind of hold that up. You know, it's really kind of a helpful breaking down what are the key ingredients of community sponsorship programs. And watch this space. We've got little plug here. We are shortly going to launch some new products as well. We've got a new guidebook to support that policy design, which incorporates now some of these other examples from other programs which have developed over the past 5 years. A new monitoring and evaluation toolkit, and a new website where all of these new resources will be held. So I thought I might bring to life the work of the GRSI through a personal story. And this relates to my time when I was back at the UK Home Office, when I was benefiting from that kind of experience and wisdom from the GRSI, rather than being a staff member, I guess, as I am now. So in early 2017, the first formal visit of the GRSI partnership was to the UK to promote our very fledgling UK sponsorship scheme. And I remember very clearly, on a sunny January day, we heard Canadians speaking so inspiringly about the origins of community sponsorship and the power of welcome, and was really struck by how that has just now become part of the fabric of Canadian society. And then two representatives from the UK, the two very first UK groups stood up, and Mark will know one of these people that I'm talking about. And they spoke in strong Manchester and South London accents about how community sponsorship was transforming their communities. And there was a real thrill in the room, actually. This was happening in our communities. It wasn't something that could only happen in Canada. You know, as Yetta, you were kind of reflecting on from the US. And a few years later, then, we were at the Canadian High Commission with New Zealand voices telling their stories of sponsorship. One of my favorite GRSI videos is from Ireland, where we hear Angam Eunice, who is a sponsored refugee herself, speaking in an Irish accent about becoming part of the sponsorship group. And I think there's something about this multiplicity of voices, accents, languages, claiming this power of sponsorship for themselves and their own communities. And it shows, I think, what we all know, right? This universality of welcome. And picking up from one of the themes from yesterday, which has come up again today, I think, you know, we all have a role in amplifying those voices, in telling the stories, and then working together to make sure that we are creating many more. So thank you. Fantastic to be here, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah, for sharing something there of the work of the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. We're going to hear a bit more about it later on at the end of the day, but I'm going to move on now and introduce the third of our remote participants. I'm delighted to welcome Miss Christine Nathan. I think, as many of you know, she is the president of the ICMC. She's from Mumbai in India. She has a long history of working to improve the rights of migrant workers. She served as a regional specialist for workers' education at the International Labour Organization between 2006 and 2014, responsible for directing ILO activities across 21 countries in the Asia Pacific region, and she worked extensively on international migration governance and cooperation issues. She's also a member of the Migrant and Labour Commission of the Archdiocese of Mumbai. So welcome, Christine. It's great to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Good day to all. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your kind introduction. As you said, I am presently in Mumbai, India, joining the workshop virtually. Participating in this workshop since yesterday has opened new doors to understanding the work done by the different groups and enabling community sponsorship and its challenges. Today's session has been really heartwarming to hear the narrative of Mumtaz Anwar and other individuals, the role of the various governments, their policies and challenges of implementation, and to provide a conducive and enabling environment. Allow me to share experiences of the International Catholic Migration Commission. ICMC Europe, established in 2012, the shared network regrouping a wide range of stakeholders, including regional and local authorities, refugee and migrant associations, NGOs and faith-based organizations interested in welcoming refugees and migrants in Europe. The work of the ICMC focuses on coordination, information sharing, promoting good practices, research, monitoring and evaluation, capacity building, and amplifying the voices of local actors and communities. Within the shared network and with the financial support from the European Union, ICMC initiated and coordinates the Quality Sponsorship Network, which brings together a consortium of actors running community sponsorship programs in Belgium, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Spain, and the UK. Among many other activities, the SHARE network brings a comparative perspective in the 7 above-mentioned countries and documents common challenges and good practices which can make the various models more resilient over the long term. A report published in May 2022 compiled first lessons learned across the 7 countries through the monitoring and evaluation of community-sponsored programs. Below and briefly, let me mention the 6 most important lessons learned. First, community sponsorship has a transformative potential for both refugees who feel a sense of security and welcome, and the host community, which feels mobilized and more cohesive and understanding better the refugee struggle. Secondly, one resounding finding highlighted throughout the evaluations has been that the design of programs have not adequately taken into account the need for more explicit and transparent partnership agreements that clearly lays out roles, responsibilities, and their duration between the government, intermediary civil society organizations, that is the NGOs and the churches, volunteer sponsor groups, and other actors. Very often, there is a blurring of roles between different actors, unclear responsibilities, and serious financial gaps. Thirdly, the transition to autonomy for the refugee families is a real challenge, as we've been hearing yesterday and today. A one-to-one 2-year support, the standard one in community sponsorship, is far too short in the light of strained labor markets, language barriers, etc. Securing and financing housing remains a challenge in all countries, and this has been mentioned by several speakers already. Fourthly, there should be a better expectation management for both sponsors and refugees, and indeed more information about the profiles of both the refugee and the sponsoring families. A good practice will be to offer the possibility of pre-departure video conferences between refugees and sponsor groups. Fifthly, it is essential to have both a civil society intermediary organization that acts as a clearinghouse between the refugees, the volunteer sponsors, and the local, regional, and national authorities, and an intercultural that speaks both languages. Sixth, and finally, it is important to build monitoring mechanisms into programs. In programs where it is done regularly, monitoring can be useful not only for the purpose of safeguarding and quality assurance, but also to troubleshoot problems and respond to needs as they arise, adapting and making small changes as needed. It is also important to systematically involve refugees in evaluation and in monitoring, building on what worked well for them and what worked less for them. In conclusion, Madam Chair, we recognize that we are all in different stages of dealing with these issues and challenges, and we had an opportunity since yesterday to hear and learn from each other's experience and finding suitable solutions. Thank you.
Many thanks there to Christine Nathan, the President of the International Catholic Migration Commission, for highlighting once again, as we said at the beginning of today, the importance of clear definition of the roles, responsibility, and duration of these programs, as well as close monitoring to see what works well. We're going to move on now. After hearing from the ICMC, we're going to hear a perspective from the UNHCR, and we're delighted to have with us today Andrea Pecoraro from the UNHCR office here in Italy. He is a lawyer specialized in human rights and European law. He's been working since 2003 in the field of asylum law and refugee protection, firstly at the Italian Council for Refugees, dealing in particular with access to the territory and unaccompanied foreign minors. But he has been part of the UNHCR office since 2008, and we're delighted you can be with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you again to the organizer for this opportunity to share our thought, even in the second day of this very interesting workshop. And thank you very much also to Motas for your words. Maybe Motas forgot to mention that apart from very inspirational speech, he has been able to have his master's degree in Italy in less than 2 years. So it's a, it's a demonstration of how refugees can be really a resource for us communities. In relation to our work, as you know, UNHCR is promotion and expansion of complementary pathways, and community sponsorship is at the center of our work and our mandate. We work together with many partners in the context of the GRSI. Maybe Greasy is a good Italian option with the Refugee Hub, Canadian government, and many other stakeholders in the context of the GRSI to promote community sponsorship. And about our role, looking particularly at our experience in Italy, maybe from my side, just 3 quick considerations. First of all, I think that UNHCR can play a very central role in the designing phase of community sponsorship program. For example, yesterday we listened the difference between the Canadian model, who offer permanent residence to people who are meeting their territory, and for example, the USA model, in which, if I well understood, people are admitted with a humanitarian status for 2 years, and then the people should apply for asylum. And we have the similar discussion in Italy, because, for example, for looking at humanitarian corridors, people who have been admitted in Italy to the humanitarian corridors or to the evacuation that Prefetto Ferrandino mentioned before apply for asylum, but you know that the asylum procedure can take some months, and this can create some anxiety in the people. And the same happened for the university corridors. Motas know very well that people in the new corridor model, for example, enter in Italy to a study visa, but then among the post-graduation opportunities, there is the possibility to apply for asylum, but at the asylum application, the asylum procedure can take some months. In the first period, people cannot work, and this can create some frustration. So when we look at these complementary pathways, in particular community sponsorship program, the designing phase is very important because we discuss a lot in Italy legal status in the departing countries and legal status in the receiving countries. Who are the beneficiaries of similar program, recognized refugees, or people who are registered with UNHCR, or simply people in need of international protection. Obviously, we should take in consideration the difference in the country of departure, because situation of refugees in Libya, for example, is very different from the situation in Lebanon, in Ethiopia, in Niger. And maybe in this case, I think that Italy is a good example of flexibility to adapt our model to the specific context in the country of departure. So the designing phase is a key part of this project, and maybe UNHCR can play a role in ensuring that the principle of Geneva Convention, the non-refoulement principle, and the other standards, the other protection and legal standards are ensured for the benefit of the refugees. A second consideration is maybe liaising between national authorities in the country of departure and the country of arrival, in the country of final destination. Because as you know, we are on the ground, we are on the field, we work with authorities in departing countries, and apart from knowing the regulation, the law that apply in specific context, we are also aware of specific practices that can constitute an obstacle for people to living. So for example, now with this new program of Afghans from Iran and Pakistan, we discuss a lot of specific practices that should be taken into consideration apart from the legal framework. And maybe the third point is about networking, partnership, that we know is a key word in the community sponsorship program. And maybe also in this case, Motas is a good example, because Motas has been admitted in Italy through the collaboration of UNHCR in Italy and Ethiopia, of civil society organization in Italy, Caritas, and the other partners that work in the university corridors. Authorities provide him with a safe and legal arrival and with a safe and legal permanence in Italy. Italian university provide a very good academic opportunities, and in connection, networking with another national authority, Canadian this one, we were able to offer a very good professional opportunity to Motas. So networking and partnership is another key point, and maybe as an UNHCR, we can have a role on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrea, for bringing us those reflections from the UNHCR's perspective, and again, highlighting the importance of developing these partnerships and increasing the networking potential. We're going to move on now to the last of our presentations in this part of the program, and we are going to hear from Anna Giustiniani. She's the Italy Project Officer at the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. She joined IOM in 1998, working on the Kosovo crisis, and then went on to work on migration flows from the Mediterranean, with a particular focus on the different dialogues that exist within this region. She's also served as the officer in charge of the IOM mission in Malta. And since 2008, she has been dealing with issues particularly related to unaccompanied migrant children. She's also been working on the questions surrounding the crises in the Mediterranean, and has started working on ways to facilitate safe movements through resettlement and intra-EU relocation. Thank you for joining us today, Anna. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Philippa. It's not easy for me to add something more to the presenters who spoke before me, but I will try. So as you see, we have a slide, I promise it's just one, but this was useful for us when we received the kind invitation from ICMC and the Canadian Embassy at the OLC. We were, using a word that Anna used before, we were thrilled to be able to participate. And so we started our internal brainstorming and we said, okay, what is it that we can bring or that we are bringing to this key legal pathway that is so effective, and we see it enlarging and expanding in many different countries. So we said, okay, let's focus on the principles that guide us in this. And as we discussed yesterday and today, I mean, there is a confirmation that those principles are just some of them you see in green. We all share those principles. We are all committed to have our intervention and actions inspired by a beneficiary-centered approach. We mentioned yesterday and today over again the importance of letting the migrants speak, hearing their voice, ensuring that they participate throughout the whole process. We also underline how important it is that protection is mainstream throughout all the actions that we implement. We also underlined several times the importance of working together, the importance of complementing each other. We also underlined today the importance of having processes defined and transparent so that everybody knows who's doing what. And what it is that we bring to this, well, our neutrality, if you like. We are a neutral partner to governments, civil society organizations, the private sector, and we use this to implement different activities in practice. So what is it that we can do? Well, we do support safe and dignified movement of people from one country to another. And as Andrea just underlined, also through the liaising activities that our missions in the countries of origin can play. We do provide humanitarian interventions to the affected population in the countries of departure, so that even those who are not part of these legal pathways can still live a dignified life. We do work a lot with communities. I mean, this word we have heard so many times in these 2 days. Community engagement activities are very important. And one very little example is a toolkit that we have set up with our colleagues and friends from Caritas through a project funded by the European Commission, which is a toolkit through which we wanted to test and pilot mentorship schemes at local level here in Italy, and also capacity building activities. We heard yesterday from Cecilia from Sant'Egidio the need for volunteers to have tools to sustain themselves, to avoid burnout and manage stressful situations. So these are concrete examples on which we can work together toward a better sustainability of this community sponsorship. And to sum up what has been said also by Anna before, it is imperative that we all work together to reach the sustainability of this program and to continue enlarging this approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna Giustiniani, for bringing us those additional perspectives from the IOM point of view. We were due at this point in the program to have a brief discussion, but we are just about up to time for this section. I'm going to suggest to the organizers perhaps that we could have our coffee break now to give you time to stretch your legs, to reflect on what you've just heard. We've had an awful lot of input from the governments and from our organizations here, so perhaps it would be good just to take 5 or 10 minutes at the very most, and we will be strict on timing, before coming back together and really trying to draw this together as we hear back again from our original panelists as to what they've heard, what they would like to take away, and we can have a discussion around that afterwards. Is that okay? Yes, I'm getting the thumbs up. Thank you. You've got 10 minutes. Be sure to be back here on time. Thank you. So welcome back for the final part of our program today, in which we're going to hear from our original panelists about their thoughts on what they have heard from the government representatives and from the international organizations, and what they would like to see in terms of taking forward this community sponsorship program. And so I'm going to start, as we have done before, with hearing from the United States, and I'd like to ask Bill Canny, the Executive Director of the Migration and Refugee Services at the US Bishops' Conference, if he'd like to share some comments, some reflections briefly.
Well, as Julietta mentioned, we have a long history of sponsorship in the United States, but listening to some of the interventions like GRSI and looking back at the record of at least one private sponsorship initiative in the US during the Reagan administration, where we have some documentation. I'm very interested in participating going forward in monitoring and evaluation activities among the countries, sharing them. The United States is unique, of course, and has, you know, a number of pathways for, you know, eventually getting refugee status in the US, but that's important takeaway for me. We've asked the University of Notre Dame to join us in looking at our initial pilot in the US and 4 dioceses, but I think getting some universities together along with GRSI, I think would be very important going forward. Thank you.
Microphone, thank you. Thank you, Bill, for that. Next, over to the United Kingdom, and Mark, perhaps you'd like to share a few thoughts on what you heard earlier.
Thank you. And I was really encouraged as a provider, as a grassroots provider of community sponsorship for what I've heard today. So I feel a strengthened ambition to have a more ambitious vision for what community sponsorship can do. And I really felt very reaffirmed in the idea that as a legal, safe pathway led by civil society, that there is a fantastic potential to grow and extend the scheme, both into other countries, but also from my perspective in the UK, to diversify and increase the participants in community sponsorship. One of the things that we touched on the other day was funding, and it is a reality that if we are to plan with confidence as principal sponsors, we do need to know that we're going to be there for the long haul. We know that we're going to be there year after year and be multiple sponsors of multiple families coming in. So I really feel that the ambition to work alongside the international organizations, to take the inspiration from different governments in their approaches to the work that we're all sharing in today. I feel that there is that motivation, that increased ambition, that vision that is needed, you know, and we really do need a vision for what is possible and what we can deliver. And it does mean taking a few risks. And I can imagine that within our home countries, of course, there are opposite and parallel forces working often against some of the things that we're trying to promote. And I don't underestimate the skill that will be needed to promote this area of work and really have community sponsorship as a major area of resettlement. My sort of other point that I take from the meeting today is that, yeah, we do need to streamline community sponsorship and make it easier for people to do. And at the same time, and I fully agree with our friends from the Home Office in the UK, that there is a balance between protection and safeguarding, and it can't be traded off against an easier, simpler approach that we have. So we've got to do some sitting down together, talking about it. You use the words co-design and co-production, and then, you know, sort of, I think civil society can then, we don't need to do the co-delivery, so to speak, but we do need to work with the local authorities to deliver the scheme. But so co-design, co-production, getting some resources behind it, but having a real vision for what community sponsorship can do. So that's what I'm listening to this afternoon, particularly from the NGOs, the governments, and what I'd call the big players out there, as opposed to the grassroots organizations. But we're looking to you for that support, and we're looking for you to help open some of those doors to communities to be able to do this valuable work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Moving over to this side of the room to our Italian panelists, the Humanitarian Corridors program. Daniele Albanese from Caritas Italiana. We're glad you're with us today, joining us just for this part of the program. And I wonder if you would like to perhaps reflect on what Prefetto Ferrandino had to say. She unfortunately couldn't remain with us, but perhaps you'd like to reflect on what she said and give us your perspective from Caritas, from your point of view.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's not just a formal thank you. I have the sense that talking about community sponsorship, we are becoming a community ourselves. I see faces around this table that we are working together all day. This morning, meanwhile that we were here, we were working to bring more people to come, students and other refugees that are going to be in Italy. And I have the sense that this transformation of communities that the president of ICMC was talking about, it's becoming real in our community as well. Communities are ready. What we were saying is not just Caritas saying it, we were discussing because we are working together as a civil society Italian organization. Communities are ready. We have more communities ready than quotas available. We saw it in the Ukrainian crisis. As Catholic Church, we are hosting 13,000 refugees from Ukraine in 6 months. Communities are ready and hosted by communities directly. The Afghan crisis as well. Corridors is another example that the communities are there where programs are well structured together with international organizations, governments and civil society organizations, increasing in numbers, it can be done. The ambition that Mark just mentioned, it is there, it is on the table. The second point that we want to highlight is that Europe can do more in this sense. Maybe I'm one of the youngest here, and I grew up with the Mediterranean Sea as a cemetery. I want to work in our work not to have it anymore, because we have created more legal pathways for people to come legally. And Europe in this sense can do more in the sense of designing. We are talking about community sponsorship in Europe, where we're talking about different programs, where it's not the same meaning that we have in different countries. So it's a matter of designing. It's a matter of framework regulation. We don't have a visa, so we are struggling about travel document and visas every time, even in our countries. And of course, that this can lead to increased numbers, which is the aim at the end. The third point is to fight against trafficking. What we see in the ground, I have the honor with the colleagues to go, tomorrow we will go to Pakistan, to go directly to refugee camps, many missions here and there in Ethiopia, in countries where refugees coming. And we see that the people, when we are there, they see, okay, I wait. If there is a hope, I can wait. I can wait for a legal pathways, not to take the regular and smuggling routes. And this sense of giving hope, it's probably one of the best things that we can do as Europe to bring the European values even abroad. As churches, as civil society organization, we are ready. We are here. We are implementing this program, and maybe in the next futures also together we can continue and increase those kind of programs all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniele, and particularly for reminding us of this threat of human trafficking, which we haven't talked about, but is such a key part and such a key problem in this work that you're doing, and reminding us of the importance of keeping hope alive for people deciding not to take that irregular route, but to wait for the possibility of a legal pathway into their countries of destination. Can I ask Fiona or Cecilia, anything else you would like to add from your perspective about what you heard today from the governments?
I think simply to reiterate the point that what we've heard today is that indeed communities as well as refugees benefit from these programs, and communities are indeed ready to welcome people, citizens are ready, but we need the buy-in from our governments to increase these programs, to expand and indeed to develop new mechanisms, because communities need the opportunity to welcome, and goodwill is not enough. It needs to be a partnership. So, so yes, let's do it. Let's do it together in partnership.
Just a thanks, as I totally agree with what Daniela said at the beginning, that this is the way to better work together, better build the future, if we can maintain and increase possibly this way of working, of creating a network, a real effective network in advising each other, in proposing and in listening to other experience, because I think this is really the key of success, the way of cooperating. Authorities, local authorities, governments, civil society, churches, international organizations, and I think this is the way.
Thank you. And over to you, Alessandra, for your perhaps comments on what you heard earlier from the international organizations as well as from your government and from the others.
Oui, je pense qu'après avoir écouté les différents gouvernements, je rentre à Montréal fière de rentrer et fière du programme de parrainage que le Canada a, en sachant qu'on doit toujours s'améliorer, mais je pense qu'on a déjà les bases pour... On a écouté aujourd'hui l'importance de l'écoute, pas seulement des organisations, des liens, mais surtout des réfugiés. Alors, je pense que les communautés qu'ils travaillent sur le terrain, ils sont à l'écoute tous les jours, et c'est aussi à nous de faire passer les messages au gouvernement de leur histoire et de le transmettre et de créer des espaces d'écoute plus souvent, des espaces de rencontres formelles et informelles où on peut vraiment se rencontrer pour construire ensemble un programme capable de répondre aux besoins. Ces programmes, c'est pour répondre aux besoins, ce n'est pas là pour répondre à n'importe quoi. Il y a derrière ces programmes des personnes avec une histoire, un nom, une dignité, des besoins concrets, et c'est sur eux qu'on doit fusionner les programmes. On a parlé des dialogues entre tous les acteurs, et je peux dire que surtout avec les gouvernements, nous, comme organisme, comme église, comme centre communautaire, on a souvent des rencontres avec les acteurs du gouvernement quand il y a des changements, il y a une nouvelle politique, ils nous informent, ils nous préparent, ils nous mettent au courant. Et ça, c'est possible s'il y a un lien de confiance. Si on sait que nous, qui on travaille sur le terrain, on a la confiance du gouvernement et le gouvernement, de son côté, a la confiance de ceux qui travaillent sur le terrain. Alors, nous, on est en lien, en pont entre le gouvernement et les personnes qui doivent arriver ou les groupes qui veulent faire le parrainage. Et ça doit être toujours alimenté. On ne peut pas interrompre ce dialogue, jamais, parce qu'une fois qu'il est interrompu, ça brise les liens, ça brise la partnership avec les autres. Et quand on a écouté l'importance de l'intégration, mais je veux reprendre un moment le pape François, que quand il parle d'intégration dans les 4 verbes, ils disent que ce n'est pas une assimilation, c'est un processus bidirectionnel. Alors, quand on parle d'intégration, on est tout capable d'accueillir l'autre et de se faire accueillir. On est capable d'échanger mutuellement. C'est toujours bidirectionnel. Alors, si on décide vraiment de se mettre dans une perspective d'accueil et d'intégration, on doit aussi s'interroger comme gouvernement, comme organisme, Est-ce qu'on est prêt et on veut changer? Merci.
Merci, thank you, Alessandra. We do now have about 15-20 minutes to continue the discussion and to perhaps open up to those of you who haven't contributed to the discussion today, or those of you who would like to respond to what you have heard. At the risk of being the provocative journalist as usual, I would like to say that I'm hearing an incredibly positive input from both sides, if you like, of the table, from the government perspective and from the organizations, as well as from the civil society. The creation, this two-day event, as you've said, has somehow created this kind of community of positive input and a desire to, as Mark said, broaden the vision and to really step up the possibilities of partnership between governments on one side and civil society players on the other. And yet, as you also said, Mark, there are plenty of forces within society that are absolutely not sharing this positive vision around migration and refugees and are actually working very hard against that. Just wondering if anybody would like to share a reflection. We're risking a little bit of speaking within our own bubble, as we say on social media, and not hearing necessarily about how we can be perhaps a little bit more aware, more effective in continuing at the end of this two-day workshop to really work harder to, if you like, counteract those forces that are working against this vision. That's a question that I'm throwing out there, but I'm happy to hear other perspectives if you would like to share anything around these issues that we've been talking about before that. Yes, please, Ambassador Noyes.
So I think that one of the things that we've seen in the United States in the response to the Afghan and Ukraine crises has been a groundswell of support from the general public on these issues. What I think that we need to do is not just rely on ourselves to speak to the people who are opposed to resettlement, but to rely on average Americans, average Italians, average Canadians, the people who, for example, in the United States, former US service members who served side by side with the Afghans and who know how much they sacrificed to stand up with us and how now it's our turn to stand up for them. People who may not, for example, support the administration or the administration's policies are certainly going to listen to former soldiers. The groundswell of support for Ukrainians, the outrage over Putin's actions, the increased outrage over his recent decision to further mobilize in Russia and even threaten nuclear war. So we need to talk amongst ourselves on the best practices, the lessons learned, learning from our mistakes as well as our successes in all of these programs. But sometimes we need to let others speak for us about why this matters. And in the United States, which is a nation, after all, of immigrants, it's a very powerful message when it's not coming just from the government.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you. Great, thank you. I actually just wanted to reiterate the same point. Some of you have heard me share in the past numbers coming out of Canada, not on the number of refugees who have been welcomed, and Michelle shared that number, it's over 300,000 over the course of the sponsorship program, but the number of sponsors. During Operation Syria in 2016, we began welcoming a lot of Syrian refugees. 40,000 were quickly resettled. A number of others arrived in subsequent years. Over 2 million Canadians served as sponsors, and over 7 million additional Canadians supported those sponsors. That's almost a third of the Canadian population that was directly engaging just over a 3-year period. And I have to say, in the years since that time, I've had the privilege of working with many of you around the world thinking about new sponsorship programs. And we've often asked ourselves, how could we achieve that scale of citizen response in other countries? And we're there. This is that moment that we've been wondering about. We have these incredible back-to-back crises, Afghanistan and Ukraine. If If you look around Europe right now, there are millions of people hosting refugees in their homes as we sit around this table. The United States, extraordinary responses, amazing leadership by the government, but also by the American people. The UK, again, incredible responses led by the British people. So I think the challenge for all of us is, okay, we have this mass mobilization of citizens. How do we leverage it for some of our broader goals, including those political goals, those narrative goals that extend beyond the work of doing the welcome? And I do think we should make sure we take a moment to pause on that, because it feels to me like a moment of incredible opportunity to do exactly what we've just heard. Let's get some of those voices out and help change the narrative.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Bond. We'll be going back over to you in a moment just for the final word. But I know that online we have Dr. Janine Romero Valenzuela from Germany wanting to contribute to this part of the discussion. Please go ahead.
Yeah, actually, not only this part of the discussion, I think I want to raise another point which is linked to this, and which is a question that we are currently facing in our program. And that is, what are the limits of the possibilities of civil society engagement? So what we have been discussing today, and what's normally come up in the circuits around community sponsorship or resettlement, is that numbers have to go up. There have to be more resettlement spots. And I would generally support that. But the problem is that we, at least in Germany and in many European countries, we're currently reaching limits of what we can manage. Because of the different crises that are happening. I already mentioned before my input, the housing crisis, but we also see limits on the side of civil society, at least in our piloting program, which is not a piloting program, which is targeting Ukraine or Afghanistan, which might be the two crises which are currently discussed about, but they are linked to our general resettlement, for example, from Lebanon, Kenya, or Egypt. And we have actually seen people withdrawing from the program. So while also the chat I read, somebody said that 200 spots is too little for our NS program. Actually, we can't fill the 200 spots. We don't find enough mentors who want to support people in our NS program because they are either otherwise occupied, supporting refugees to other Ukrainian refugees, for example, or they're not interested. You've seen that you also talked about there's not everybody's welcoming refugees, and of course not everybody's thus interested in a program like this. And also the municipalities, we had a lot of municipalities that have been very engaged in the program, have supported it, have now withdrawn from the program because they are just so occupied with managing the Ukraine crisis that they cannot take in somebody else. And it's somehow a situation involves where there's one refugee group is somehow played against another, or who gets housing and who doesn't. And it's a situation with, at least in our community sponsoring context, I wouldn't say we have a perfectly enabling condition. We rather have the different side of it, where we really can argue why this program should also be supported on top of everything else that communities and municipalities or civil society have to do. So just another point I would like to raise for the discussion, because that's really bothering us.
Thank you very much for that. Would anybody else like to comment on what Janine was saying, to kind of respond to or suggest ways of dealing with those difficulties, as she was mentioning people withdrawing? I saw, Mark, that you were sort of nodding and in agreement there. Would you like to pick up on what she was saying?
Well, interestingly, in the UK, we've had a thing called additionality with community sponsorship, which meant that there is actually no limit to the number of sponsors, refugees that you can bring in on the sponsorship program. So it's without limit. No targets have been set, for example, and yet actually the numbers are low. Perhaps 150 families, 700 or 800 beneficiaries, so to speak, of the scheme. So it's interesting that even without any limits on the scheme, the numbers are low, and we've got to ask why that is the case. And my personal feeling is that we need to broaden what a sponsor can be defined as. So, for example, I'm not sure if in Germany they have the group of 5, for example, I think they do. Other countries have that as well. There's naming, family reunion. I believe in Canada, for example, that perhaps 9 out of 10 people coming into Canada at this moment in time might come through naming, if you like, through the schemes and stuff. Those are ways of boosting the scheme. And they do have benefits, because that means that if you can boost the scheme, you can potentially have more people engaged in it. So I think there are issues of that. The other point I'd make, though, is that numbers can be very easily manipulated and very easily misled, for example, as well. So, for example, in the UK, when we had the Syrian, what we call the Syrian crisis, between 20 and 30,000 Syrians came in through the official program of the BPRS program. At this moment in time, up to today, we've had 23,000 irregular migrants coming into the UK on boats across the channel. We do, in my view, we do have the capacity to absorb those sorts of numbers and to take them in. Housing is one of the biggest issues that we face, quite frankly, and because the UK government is actually very generous in its resettlement program funding and benefits, that citizens are treated, refugees are treated the same as any other citizen. So I wouldn't get involved too much in the numbers business, but we do need to expand the number of people that can become sponsors, and we need to look outside our box, so to speak, to others.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, broadening the definition of who can be a sponsor. Daniele Albanese from Caritas, you'd like to respond to this, wouldn't you?
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question, the one about limit, which is the limit. Talking about Italy, last year we received 67,000 people by boat, mainly single men. And we are talking about 4,000 people arriving with corridors in 6 years, more or less. So numbers are not comparable in that sense. What is, in my feeling, the point is about the quality of programs and the outcomes that we have. The experience that US is sharing and Canada is sharing is that these sponsorship programs works better for integration in the future. So it's not a burden. When we talk about limit, we talk about burden. Refugees as MOTAs, they are not a burden. They are resources for our societies in general. It becomes a resources in a shorter period of time. Even more if there are families together, as those ones that you are bringing with the corridors, instead of single men that are coming by irregular migration, as it is the only possibility to come to arrive in Europe. And so talking about quality and outcomes probably can lead to the things that Jennifer was highlighting, the fact that we are at the point that people are hosting Ukrainians, a lot, thousands of people in a short period of time, but it's not a burden now for the Italian state. 150,000 more or less the people arrived in a few months. It's not a burden for the people of Italy. I mean, we opened the door and it is positive because they are hosted by communities. So in this sense, the limit can be overwhelmed and overcome if the quality of the programs will enhance.
Thank you for that contribution. Anybody else like to comment on this, either in terms of, yes, the quality of the programs, as you say, in order to really grow and expand this work, or broadening this definition of a sponsor as well? Anybody else like to come in on that? This is the last opportunity you'll have to add to the conversation before we move on to our final speaker in just a moment. Anybody else, either online or our three participants online, or yes, Stefan from ICMC.
I'm monitoring the chat, so there are a number of questions in the chat. 3 from Germany, 2 are Germany specific, and 1 from Germany is a kind of a much broader question, and I think we have already discussed it, but I would like to raise it again. Is what is the potential for growth? for growing, for the program to go from relatively small numbers into a much larger program, but also, and we need to add that, which is sustainable. So I don't know whether some of you would like to answer that question before I ask the two German-specific questions.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Ambassador Noyes.
So we're building on the U4U, the Uniting for Ukraine, and the sponsor circles for Afghanistan. We'll be launching a pilot program in the United States for community sponsorship. We're drawing the lessons from those two prior initiatives, and we're going to launch something small and see what's working and what's not working. The plan is initially that we would start out with a program whereby, and we're examining, we've received some proposals from organizations that will be providing the support, the capacity building, the monitoring and evaluation. We'll have a partner to manage that part of the program. But the plan is to learn from that pilot and then scale up and eventually move to a program where the refugees and the sponsors identify themselves, which we think has the potential to really grow quite a bit. We don't have specific numbers at this point. The plan is to have a program that does not replace, but complements the traditional resettlement model that we have working with resettlement agencies. And clearly there are cases, special cases, for example, people with psychosocial trauma or people with disabilities, people with particular types of needs where it simply makes sense to leave them in a more professional type sponsorship with the resettlement agencies. But we hope that there's a potential to scale it up quite a lot because the president has given us some very high targets for resettlement in the United States. And some of our resettlement partner agencies don't think that those targets are high enough. So we are looking to do everything that we can to scale up through traditional models, through this pilot, through moving to a greater model. But I think that the potential for growth is quite significant, at least in the United States.
Yes, please, Hannah.
Some of the reflections that we've already heard over the past 2 days, but for me, the potential for growth and the sustainability, there are lessons from the traditional, I'm going to say, community sponsorship programs, which I think hold the ingredients there for sustainable program development, having the community at the heart of it. I think so, thinking about the size of the group, understanding and really thinking through what the expectations are of groups and of refugees. So all of that learning, I think, that we take from 40 years of Canadian experience and the pilot programs that we've seen developing over the past number of years. And then the growth, marrying that, I think, with the just incredible growth that we have seen over the past kind of 6 months, over the past kind of year, that scale and that capacity and that capability and that willingness to welcome, we combine the best of both. It's a bridge point, right? Combine the best of both, and you've got sustainability and you've got scale. And we can't, let's not be naive. This is not easy. I think it's very challenging. If you've got somebody in your home who you welcomed for what you thought might be kind of a few weeks, a few months, now it's looking like 6 months or possibly 9 months or possibly kind of more, that's really challenging. And I think that's where we need to acknowledge that and really think about what are the supports that you wrap around that. And there's a lot of learning, I think, from community sponsorship that helps. So that's the key for me. We've got sustainability, we've got scale. Let's bring them together and see what we can build from there.
Very good point. And a couple more questions. So you mentioned, Stefan, from the German context. If you're listening also online, Janine, to be able to respond to these, perhaps? Yep.
Yes, they are indeed addressed to Janine. I think they are both related to housing. So I will try to summarize, but basically in Germany, it seems that you have to advance the money for the rent if you are a sponsor. It used to be 24 months. I understand now it has been reduced to 12 months, which means that it's a big obstacle for small groups to be able to sponsor. And the question is whether there would be some solution to be able to accommodate more sponsor with maybe less financial means or the capacity to pay every month, but not in advance.
Yes, I mean, we have, as you said, we have reduced the requirements quite substantially, and we're now in line with most other programs that have either the same or more substantial requirements. So I think we've already gone a step to reduce the barriers. As for the upfront payment, that's important because we want to have security for the refugees themselves. If payment is monthly and then it's not committed, the mentors do not continue in the engagement, we really have a problem to then sustain the housing for the refugees. And I think their point of view and their safety is most paramount. But most of the, as you said, for the question of how to engage people with less financial means, actually we've seen a lot of groups that have been able to raise funding externally. So that's the idea of the program, is of course that the civil society needs to be engaged, and also for the question that we have already discussed, what about the people who are not supportive of more migrants coming to the country? It's important that to show that this additionality of the community sponsorship is also financed through the civil society themselves to a certain extent. Of course, the German government finances a big part as well in this program. But we've seen a lot of groups that have been able to secure external funding, either through crowdfunding or through church communities, that either we do not have, there's not an obligatory to pay the rent, but you can also just find housing. And many groups have found housing through church communities, or have given them their own place in their own home or homes they owned. And I think this is the way forward, and we're also going into more cooperation with the businesses. There's a program on the way to talk to small businesses that then will support the rent for a year, and then their own employees form the mentoring group. And just to connect to a point raised before, we had the group of 5, we reduced it to a group of 4. We didn't want so that it's more people can participate, where we didn't want to give up on a certain minimal number, because we think it should be a burden sharing between the mentors. And in a lot of cases, even 4 or 5 is little. So we've seen mentoring groups that are way bigger. And then if they are bigger, then they share the financial burden, and that has been sustainable to a certain extent.
Thank you very much, Janine, and thank you to Stefan for keeping an eye on the chat and making sure that we could respond to some of the comments that have been coming in online. With that, I'm going to move on to the final part of the program today, and we're going to hear from Professor Jennifer Bond, who you have already heard from, but I'm going to introduce her formally. She's the chair of the GRSI, the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative, as well as being the founder and managing director of the Refugee Hub at Ottawa University. She holds degrees in law, literature, and business. She has served as a special advisor to Canada's Ministry of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship on the Syrian Refugee Initiative. Earlier in her career, she also worked with UNHCR in Syria. Professor Bond was recently awarded the International Commission of Jurists' prestigious Tamopolsky Award and was appointed to the Order of Ontario for her national and international contributions to refugee protection. So who better to conclude today's proceedings for us? The floor is yours.
Great, thanks very much. So I have the privilege, but I must say also the great challenge of trying to wrap up what has been an incredibly rich 2-day conversation. So I want to set the expectation. I will not do justice to everything we've discussed together, but I did want to put back to all of you some of the key areas that I think have surfaced. And I was asked to reflect on, what do we need to do from here? What are the steps we need to take coming out of this incredible conversation. So here's my attempt to give you five clusters of work, which hopefully resonate as you think about your own path forward. The first relates to policy design. I think a lot of the wonderful suggestions and exchanges, comments coming from both our civil society partners and governments themselves, conversations about housing, the cost of sponsorship, how many people should be in a sponsorship group. All of these conversations need to continue. And to be candid, we need to continue learning from each other because we don't know what models work best. This has been a collective journey over the last few years, experimenting in different contexts, learning about how sponsors will respond in different ways to different policy settings. We need to keep at that policy work. So I want to invite you to see that as an ongoing and iterative process, not a process that starts and stops once a program gets launched. And I think you know, the exciting thing about where we are now is there are so many innovations in the models that exist around the world. We see sponsorship coming in to support incredible refugee students. We see sponsorship supporting refugee workers, LGBTQI refugees, supporting specific cases, named sponsorship, where sponsors and refugees have an existing connection that can be accommodated by the system. Of course, UNHCR referred refugees. Some particularly challenging cases may be referred to sponsorship, and on it goes. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to take what is a very simple concept, empowering our citizens to lead in this incredibly important welcome work, and also critically trusting them. And this is a hard thing for governments to do, but trusting those citizens to do a good job and empowering them to take that step. There's so much we can do with it. And I think we're just really starting to learn. So let's keep exploring in the space of what these policies can look like. My second and related cluster is around the operational models. And I think, quite frankly, it's easy for some of us who think a lot about policy to forget about the impact of operations. And there's been a number of comments that have surfaced over the last 2 days that I think really highlight the success of these programs can really be contingent on getting the operational model right. So that can be everything from the overseas processing time. And we heard some comments, sponsors find it difficult to wait for 5 years for someone to arrive. So we might find that to be frustrating in our traditional systems, but it may actually result in the failure of a sponsorship-based system because the group may not be able to hold itself together and wait out that period of time. The amount of paperwork and bureaucracy, when they can connect to the newcomer, the refugee they will be working with, those things can be really motivating for sponsors. So where that sits in the operational design, these key questions around funding. We've heard from a number of NGO partners, the sustainability of the programs from their perspectives is really contingent on their ability to find staff and to put in place support, support for the host, support for the sponsors, the ability to recruit those sponsors. How we find the funding and create sustainable operational models, I think is equally as important to those central policy questions on who comes and who welcomes them and how many people are in the group. So that whole cluster around operations, I think has been surfaced in a number of ways over the last 2 days. And I think let's just make sure we don't lose sight of it as we get excited about the potential of some exciting new policies. I think in this moment, a number of you have been reflecting on Afghanistan and Ukraine, and I will take the opportunity to add to that Syria because it was an initiative that I was involved in, and I saw how critical it was for Canada to be able to use and leverage its private sponsorship program to put up a scaled response. It's not dissimilar to what is happening now across Europe or the United States experienced around Afghanistan. When you need to rapidly scale reception capacity, sponsorship turns out to be a really powerful crisis response tool. And I think we need to think about it in a slightly different way when we imagine it as a crisis response tool than as part of our steady state programming. So I would invite us to think about that as a third and discrete cluster. What have we learned? What are we still learning about the past year and the way that we've been using this tool of community welcome to help us navigate these two overlapping crises? What can we learn from this that we want to make sure we have in our back pocket for the next time that we have to rapidly scale our reception capacity? And I think it's a slightly different question than what are we going to learn from this moment that helps us strengthen our ongoing resettlement programs. The fourth point for me, and it's been made beautifully and eloquently by many of you around the table, is really about the critical function of collaboration, cooperation, collective learning. I think that these programs at their heart, when they're functioning well at the national level, are all about partnerships. And it is a privilege to be here today and watch governments and NGOs exchange so candidly and openly and think together about how to make these programs successful in the 5 countries that have been represented. That partnership is absolutely critical to ensuring the success of these programs. But there's so many more layers to that as well. So we heard some examples surfaced around the need to create the equivalent of a national body of principal sponsors so that they can learn from each other and continue to collaborate. The need for sponsors to get to know each other and feel motivated and excited about what's going on in their neighbor. And maybe that's what's going to motivate them to take that next step. The need for us all to stay in conversation with each other. The opportunities to learn together about these programs is another really important aspect of collective learning and collaboration. So many examples surfaced for me over the last few days about the future of this work being contingent on us doing it together, and then thinking really about what that means at the local, national, and global level, and figuring out how we can be a powerful collective. And my last cluster is really around achieving what I think we all hope is the greatest aspiration of sponsorship. And I mentioned it a minute ago when I said there's millions of people right now hosting refugees. How do we leverage it? And I think many of us are motivated by the big picture potential of sponsorship, not only to help us welcome more refugees and see these integration benefits and see, the richness that brings to our communities, but also to help heal our communities at a time of great division and a time when there's been a politicization of this space. And I have to say that for me, we have to keep our eye on that, and we have to be deliberate about it. So it means not just having a sponsorship happen. It means making sure we're telling the story of that sponsorship. It means equipping our sponsors to know how to tell that story in a respectful way. It means making sure we're empowering the voices of newcomers who are coming to make sure that they can share their stories, and making sure that we create spaces for the success, because I think our national media tends to create space for the negative stories. How do we create space in the national narrative for the success stories so that we can leverage the true potential of this incredible tool? And that will bring me, that's the end of my clusters, but I just wanted to offer, if I may, just one personal reflection. And you've heard from my wonderful colleague, Hannah, that we are in the 5th year of work as the Global Refugee Sponsorship Initiative. And it has been a privilege for me personally to have been with this work over the course of those 5 years. When we began, it was a very small table. There was a very small number of states and a very small number of NGOs doing this work. And today, when I look around, for me, the hope and the potential of this work is in this room. And it's the community around community sponsorship. So thank you, Daniele, for evoking that terminology. This is where the power sits, working together, trying to figure out what we can do next to really grow this space and make it into something bigger and more powerful for us, for our countries, for our communities, and of course for the newcomers we're welcoming. So tremendous joy to be with you and to benefit from all of your expertise. And I just hope we can continue to learn together, be bold, be big, be ambitious. Let's keep iterating and figuring out how we can maximize the potential of the tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jennifer, for those words. I'm looking around the room as you're speaking, and I'm seeing people on both sides of the table hanging on your every word and nodding in agreement. And that's no mean feat at this time of the afternoon, after 2 days of discussions that have been as intense as they have been. So thank you very much indeed for your words of encouragement and for your really your urging us to continue doing the work that we're doing. So just to conclude then, we're going to hear back from our two organizers for a word of thanks. Perhaps, Paul, would you like to start for us?
Thanks, Philippa. I started the first day with words of thanks, and I wanted to conclude today with words of thanks. First of all, for those of you who have been here as participants, both online and here in person, thank you very, very much. Second, to all of you who have been speakers yesterday and today, government, international organizations, civil society, refugees, academics, I don't know where to put you exactly, Jennifer, but one of those categories. To Philippa, our very, very able moderator, who has somehow miraculously kept us right on time, so that's quite a feat. To the co-sponsors of this event, once again, the embassies of Germany, Italy, the United States, and the United Kingdom. To our colleagues at Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, in particular to Angel and to Justina here at our embassy to Rome. To the Dicastery for Integral Human Development, I think Jessica stepped out of the room, but I wanted to thank her in particular. And of course, to our partners and co-organizers of this workshop, a huge, huge thanks. I wanted to, there's a whole team that obviously works on that side of things. And I wanted to single out Clara, if I could, because she's actually kept the online portion of this event functioning seamlessly as far as I can tell. So that's wonderful. Last but not least, I wanted to thank my own team, and I wanted to thank Marcella for the work that she has done on this event as well. So thank you. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Paul. And over now to Monsignor Bob Vitillo from ICMC for your concluding thoughts on today's proceedings.
Well, thanks, I think we need to say to Paul as well. You've been the guiding spirit through all of this, and you really were the animator for us. So thank you, Paul. It's been wonderful to work with you. Also, I want to thank the interpreters who have been very quietly interpreting, and David Kleiber from our IT staff, who's been partnering with Clara, but he's not present among us. I started out my remarks yesterday with the affirmation that Pope Francis's theme for the 108th World Day of Migrants and Refugees, Building the Future with Migrants and Refugees, was music to my ears. During the 2 days of this community resettlement workshop, that music inspired and helped us to produce a symphony concert. Some of the principal instruments in this concert include the following. Since community resettlement is based on partnership, the local host communities, and let's not forget that we mention the faith leaders, communities, and organizations very frequently during these days. All these communities serve as the first violins in the symphony. The governments constitute the bass section, providing security, coordination, legislation, and regulation. They best perform when they offer facilitation, but also leave room for creativity and sensitivity to the diverse needs of both refugees and hosts. Traditional resettlement cannot be expelled from this orchestra. It serves as the trombone section. Community resettlement is not meant to serve as a substitute or a replacement, but as an essential complementary component in this symphony. The refugees themselves, including the refugee families, embody the flute section, bringing their voices of pain, trauma, desperation, and longing, but also of resilience, skills, values, culture, determination, hard work, and gratitude. All these sections or partners are blended in the two-way process of integration in faith and in hope, providing mutual and vital contributions to the final movement of strengthening and improving our common home of one humanity and of all creation on the foundation of charity and justice for all. Thanks for including ICMC as part of the orchestra.
Indeed, Father Bob, for that beautiful image of the orchestra with its many different sections working together to build our common home. I said at the beginning it was a delight for me to be asked to moderate, to facilitate this conversation. You know, as a journalist, we so often feel that we're perhaps just scratching the surface of these crucial issues and not really understanding, you know, the deeper challenges and the deeper issues. And it's been great for me to be here for these last couple of days and to really get a feel of the ways in which we can better cover these kind of stories and help play a little part, as we've suggested here, the urgent need to change the narrative and perhaps how, you know, I as a member of the media can help to do that. So it's been a real joy for me as well to be part of this. And all I can do once again is to thank you all for your participation and to wish you well as you continue your onward journey towards building the future through these community sponsorship programs. Thank you very much and have a great evening.